There comes a moment, quiet, piercing, and unforgettable, when an avoidant finally realizes they've let the right person go. It doesn't happen right away. It doesn't hit them during the breakup or in the first few weeks of freedom when they're convincing themselves they did the right thing. No, it comes later. In the stillness, when life no longer feels like an escape, but a hollow silence. Avoidants often push people away not because they don't care, but because caring feels dangerous. They've learned to equate closeness with loss, vulnerability with pain, and love with the risk of rejection. So, when someone comes along who truly sees them, who offers warmth, patience, and genuine connection, it terrifies them. They crave intimacy but fear being consumed by it, and in that internal conflict, they sabotage the very thing they secretly long for. The realization strikes unexpectedly. Maybe it's when they see you laugh in a photo with someone new. Maybe it's when they go on dates and no one makes them feel that same electric comfort. Or maybe it's when they finally sit with their thoughts, no longer numbed by distractions, and realize that the calm they mistook for freedom was actually loneliness wearing a clever disguise. This moment of awareness is brutal. They remember the safety they felt in your presence, the way you listened without judgment, the way your affection made them feel seen, the way you never demanded perfection, only honesty, and they finally understand they weren't running from you, they were running from themselves. You were never too much. They simply couldn't meet the depth of what you offered. And here's the truth that hurts the most. When avoidants lose someone who loved them through their walls, they begin to see that love like yours doesn't come often. They replay the moments they shut down when you reached out, the times they pulled away instead of speaking up, and they realize they weren't protecting themselves. They were abandoning the very connection that could have healed them. By the time this awareness blooms, it's often too late. You've moved on, stronger and wiser, having learned that love can't survive without emotional reciprocity. And though they might reach out, hoping to rekindle what's gone, the energy has shifted. You've grown into someone who no longer waits for potential. You now seek presence. And that's when the lesson becomes clear for both sides. For you, it's understanding that loving someone doesn't mean saving them from themselves. For them, it's realizing that real love isn't a threat. It's the safest place they'll ever find. But sometimes that lesson comes only after they've lost the person who showed it to them. The realization doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It creeps in quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. When an avoidant lets the right person go, they rarely understand the gravity of their choice in the moment. Initially, they feel a strange sense of relief. Convincing themselves they've reclaimed their space, their control, their freedom. They tell themselves they escape drama, intensity, or emotional suffocation. They convince themselves it was necessary, that they're better off alone. For weeks or even months, they may lean on this illusion of peace. They fill their days with distractions, new hobbies, maybe even new people. They tell themselves they're fine, but deep down, a subtle ache begins to grow. It often starts in small, unexpected moments. A song that used to play when you were together, a familiar smell, a random thought that surfaces when they least expect it. These memories begin to tug at something they thought they'd buried. The laughter they once dismissed as noise now echoes like music they can't find anywhere else. They realize that the calm they were chasing doesn't feel fulfilling anymore. It feels empty. They thought solitude would feel like freedom, but it begins to resemble isolation. The silence that once felt like comfort now highlights everything that's missing. Avoidants spend so much time trying to outrun discomfort that they forget growth often hides within it. When they let go of someone who truly cared, they believe they've avoided pain. What they don't see immediately is that they've only postponed it. The person they pushed away becomes a mirror they can no longer access, a reflection of what love could have looked like if fear hadn't interfered. They start noticing that no one else quite compares, that no new connection feels as natural, and that emotional safety, something they once took for granted, is not so easily found. Over time, they begin to see patterns. Every time someone new tries to get close, they feel the same tension rise inside them, that instinct to pull away, to protect, to guard their space, and then it hits them. It wasn't the person who was the problem. It was their inability to stay present with vulnerability. The realization cuts deep because it's not about missing a person anymore. It's about missing the version of themselves that felt alive, seen, and capable of connection. They remember the small moments they dismissed, the patience in your tone, the warmth in your eyes, the way you stayed even when they withdrew. And now, without you there, they begin to understand that love like that was rare. It wasn't something to manage or escape from. It was something to build with. The right person wasn't trying to take their freedom. They were offering companionship. That understanding, when it finally arrives, shakes them. It comes in waves of regret, self-awareness, and longing, a bittersweet recognition that they let something irreplaceable slip away, not because it wasn't right, but because they weren't ready to receive it. Avoidants often live with a deep and quiet fear that love will cost them their sense of safety. To outsiders, their detachment might look cold or indifferent, but beneath that calm exterior lies a constant battle between longing for connection and fearing its consequences. When they push people away, it isn't because they don't feel, it's because they feel too much, and that intensity overwhelms them. They've learned somewhere along the way that closeness equals danger, that vulnerability invites disappointment, and that to need someone is to risk being hurt. So they build walls, not because they want to keep others out, but because they've convinced themselves it's the only way to survive emotionally. This fear often comes from past experiences, early relationships, family dynamics, or heartbreaks that left them feeling unseen, unheard, or abandoned. Every time they tried to open up, it backfired. Every time they showed emotion, it was met with rejection or betrayal. So now, when someone comes along who truly cares, who sees their walls and gently tries to reach beyond them, their instincts misfire. The avoidant feels both drawn in and terrified at the same time. They crave the comfort of closeness, but simultaneously brace for the pain that they believe will inevitably follow. As a result, they may appear distant, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable. They send mixed signals, moments of warmth followed by cold withdrawal. They might say they want love, but act in ways that sabotage it. To them, these actions make sense. It's their subconscious trying to control the unpredictable nature of intimacy. If they can stay in charge of how close someone gets, they can prevent being blindsided by pain again. But what they don't realize is that this self-protection slowly turns into self-sabotage. The more they try to protect themselves from emotional harm, the more they guarantee it, because love can't survive behind a fortress. When they meet someone patient and emotionally grounded, it triggers something deep within them. That person becomes a mirror, showing them what safety and trust could feel like. But for an avoidant, even that can feel unbearable. They may misinterpret kindness as manipulation or consistency as pressure. They begin to fear that if they let their guard down, they'll lose their autonomy, so they retreat into their old habits, withdrawing, minimizing emotions, or pretending they don't care. The tragedy is that they do care. They just can't express it in a way that nurtures connection. And when that connection finally breaks, the fear that once seemed like protection becomes the very thing they regret most. They start to see how love was never their enemy. Fear was. The people they pushed away weren't trying to take control. They were trying to share life with them. But because fear spoke louder than trust, the avoidant convinced themselves that closeness was a trap, not realizing that true intimacy doesn't confine, it heals. And by the time they understand that, the person who once made them feel safe enough to try is often gone. At first, the avoidant feels a sense of lightness after walking away from the relationship. The tension of emotional closeness is gone, and with it, the pressure to be vulnerable or accountable. They mistake this release for peace, calling it freedom, independence, or clarity. They might even convince themselves that they made the right decision, that they're better off alone, where no one can demand too much of them. But as the days stretch into weeks and the silence grows louder, something begins to shift. The freedom that once felt liberating starts to feel strangely hollow. What they thought was relief slowly transforms into restlessness. The absence of emotional intensity doesn't bring comfort, it brings emptiness. Avoidants often misinterpret emotional space as a sign of safety, but when that space becomes a void, they start to feel its weight. The quiet moments that once brought them calm now echo with memories. They replay old conversations, remember laughter, the sound of your voice, the warmth of shared moments. At first, they try to brush it off. convincing themselves it's just nostalgia or habit. But over time, they realize it's more than that. It's longing. They miss the connection they thought they didn't need. The solitude they once craved starts to resemble isolation, and the silence they sought begins to feel like punishment. They may try to fill the void with distractions, work, social events, casual relationships, or endless scrolling through screens, but none of it touches the emptiness within. That's when the truth starts to surface. It wasn't the relationship that was suffocating. It was their own fear of being seen too deeply. The calm they believed they were chasing wasn't peace, it was avoidance. Real peace, they begin to realize, doesn't come from running. It comes from understanding, communicating, and allowing oneself to be known. And because they ran from that, their so-called freedom has now become a cage built from their own defenses. Eventually, life slows down enough that they can't avoid the emptiness anymore. Nights feel longer. The bed feels colder. They might look at the phone thinking of reaching out, but pride or fear stops them. In those quiet moments, they begin to sense that what they're missing isn't just the person. They're missing the version of themselves that existed in that connection, the part of them that could feel, laugh, share, and be real. Without that bond, they realize they've gone back to surviving, not living. The false sense of independence crumbles when they see you moving on, smiling, or simply existing without them. That's when it hits them hardest. That the stillness they once valued so much is actually loneliness disguised as strength. They start to understand that freedom without connection isn't fulfillment. It's emptiness dressed as control. And while they once feared being vulnerable, they now fear something much worse, never being truly known again. When the realization finally hits that they've lost someone who made them feel safe, the avoidance mind becomes a reel of vivid memories they can't switch off. It's not the grand gestures that haunt them, but the small, intimate moments, the gentle touch on their arm when they were anxious, the quiet patience you showed when they withdrew, the softness in your voice that made them feel understood without needing to explain. They start to remember how rare it was to be around someone who didn't try to fix them, but simply made space for their emotions, even when those emotions came out as distance or silence. In hindsight, they recognize that what they once interpreted as pressure was actually care, and what they once labeled as vulnerability now looks like genuine safety. They begin to see how you offered something stable in a world that always felt unpredictable to them. You weren't trying to take their independence away. You were offering them partnership. You didn't demand they change overnight. You simply asked for presence, for honesty, for effort. At the time, those requests felt overwhelming because emotional intimacy felt like unfamiliar territory. But now, in your absence, those same moments play back as opportunities they missed. They start to understand that the security they ran from was the very thing they'd been searching for all along. This awareness doesn't come gently, it stings. They see flashes of how you looked at them with trust, even when they pulled away. They remember how you gave them reassurance when they were cold or unresponsive, how you stayed when they didn't know how to love back. In every memory, they realize that you were offering them something pure, a love that didn't demand perfection but welcomed authenticity. But because they had built their identity around not needing anyone, they couldn't see it for what it was. They mistook your emotional warmth for danger because they'd been conditioned to believe that closeness always leads to pain. As time passes, the absence of that emotional safety becomes louder than any argument or misunderstanding ever. They notice it in the emptiness of small routines, the good morning texts that no longer come, the laughter that used to fill quiet evenings, the way they could once talk about anything without fear of judgment. Every new interaction feels shallow compared to what they had with you. They meet people who may be attractive, charming, or even kind, but none of them evoke that same sense of emotional security. That's when it becomes clear. It wasn't that you were too much. It was that you made them feel too deeply. In this stage, regret starts to take shape. They finally understand that love doesn't mean losing oneself. It means finding safety in being seen. You were the mirror that reflected back the parts of them they tried to hide. And now, without that reflection, they feel an ache that no distraction can soothe. They realize that the love they once dismissed as overwhelming was actually the safest, most grounding connection they ever knew. When the dust settles and the connection is gone, both people are left with lessons that reach far deeper than heartbreak. For the one who loved the avoidant, the experience becomes a masterclass in boundaries, patience, and self-respect. Loving someone who fears intimacy teaches you that compassion cannot substitute for emotional availability. You start to realize that no matter how much love, care, or understanding you pour into someone, it can't make them ready to receive it. You learn that you can't heal someone's wounds by sacrificing your own peace, and that love only thrives when both people are willing to meet each other halfway. It's a painful truth to accept, because when you loved them, you saw their potential, the glimpses of warmth and depth beneath their guarded exterior. But potential without willingness is like a seed never watered. It doesn't grow. In time, you begin to see your own growth through the loss. You learn to stop confusing emotional labor with love. You stop trying to prove your worth through someone's acceptance. You recognize that your empathy is powerful, but it's not meant to be spent endlessly on someone unwilling to open up. You stop chasing closure from them and start giving closure to yourself by acknowledging that you did your best. But love cannot flourish without emotional reciprocity. That realization transforms you. It strengthens your ability to love yourself enough to walk away from what drains you, even when your heart still cares. For the avoidant, the lesson comes differently. They feel the weight of what they've lost in delayed waves. It often takes losing someone patient, someone who truly cared, to realize how much their fear of vulnerability cost them. They start to see how their pattern of withdrawing wasn't protection. It was self-sabotage disguised as control. They understand that running from emotional closeness didn't save them from pain. It created a deeper, quieter form of it. The moment they recognize this, the guilt begins to surface, not because they intended to hurt anyone, but because they now see how love slipped through their fingers while they were busy defending themselves from imaginary threats. They start to replay the moments when they could have spoken but chose silence, when they could have leaned in but chose distance, and they realize that every retreat was a missed opportunity to build the very connection they claimed they wanted. This awareness can be devastating because it forces them to confront a truth they've avoided their whole lives, that safety doesn't come from walls, but from trust. Both people ultimately grow, though in very different ways. One learns to protect their heart without hardening it. The other learns that love isn't a trap to escape, but a sanctuary to be embraced. The relationship becomes a turning point for both, a reminder that love without readiness leads to lessons, and that sometimes the most profound form of love is the one that teaches you how to never lose yourself again while loving someone else. In the end, this journey reminds us that love isn't about fixing, chasing, or proving. It's about showing up, being present, and choosing courage over fear. Sometimes losing someone becomes the mirror that reveals who we truly are and what we're ready to heal within ourselves. For the avoidant, it's the awakening that love was never the enemy. For the one who loved them, it's the realization that letting go is its own form of strength. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for honoring the kind of love that teaches us, even through loss, how to grow into the people we were always meant to become.